The First World War, often called the Great War, began in 1914 and lasted until 1918. It was one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, reshaping nations and the balance of power in the world. The war was sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo. On June 28, 1914, this single event ignited long-standing tensions among major European powers. Fueled by nationalism, militarism, and complex alliances, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, triggering a chain reaction of alliances and declarations of war. Within weeks, most of Europe was engulfed in conflict. The war saw two major alliances, the Allies, including France, Britain, Russia, and later the United States, and the Central Powers, mainly Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Both sides believed in quick victories, but the reality of trench warfare turned the conflict into a long and grueling struggle. Soldiers faced horrific conditions in the trenches, including mud, disease, and constant bombardment. The Western Front, stretching across France and Belgium, became synonymous with endless fighting and heavy casualties. Battles such as the Somme, Verdun, and Ypres showcased the immense human cost of the war, with millions of soldiers killed or wounded. War was also marked by the introduction of new technologies that changed warfare forever. Machine guns, tanks, poison gas, and airplanes transformed battlefields, increasing the scale of destruction and challenging traditional military strategies. Naval warfare also became crucial, with blockades and submarine attacks targeting supply lines and civilian shipping. Civilians were not spared, as cities were bombed and resources became scarce. Propaganda played a huge role in maintaining public support and demonizing the enemy, shaping how societies viewed the conflict. The war had far-reaching consequences beyond the battlefield. The Russian Empire collapsed, leading to the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires disintegrated, giving rise to new nations in Europe and the Middle East. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended the war but imposed harsh penalties on Germany. Sowing the seeds for future conflict, the League of Nations was created in an attempt to prevent another global war. Though its effectiveness was limited, World War I left a permanent mark on culture, politics, and society. It exposed the horrors of modern warfare and the fragility of peace. Literature, art, and films of the period reflected the trauma experienced by soldiers and civilians alike. The war also set the stage for World War II, as unresolved tensions and economic turmoil continued to affect nations worldwide. Understanding the First World War is essential for comprehending the 20th century and its global impact. The early months of World War I revealed the intensity and scale of modern warfare. Germany executed the Schlieffen Plan, aiming to quickly defeat France by invading through Belgium. However, resistance from Belgian forces slowed the advance, giving the Allies time to mobilize. The Battle of the Marne, in September 1914, marked a turning point. As Allied forces halted the German advance near Paris, this led to the beginning of trench warfare, which would dominate the Western Front for years. Soldiers dug complex networks of trenches, facing harsh conditions, mud, and relentless artillery fire. Life in the trenches was grueling, with soldiers enduring exposure to the elements, lice infestations, and the constant threat of death. Meanwhile, the Eastern Front between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia saw large-scale battles across vast territories. The Russian army initially made advances but suffered heavy losses due to poor leadership and logistics. The war quickly became a global conflict, drawing colonies from Africa, Asia, and the Pacific into the fighting.
Battles in
Africa, the Middle East, and naval confrontations expanded the war beyond Europe. The use of new weapons like poison gas, heavy artillery, and early tanks shocked both soldiers and civilians. Technology began to outpace traditional tactics, resulting in mass casualties and horrific battlefield experiences. Economic and social aspects of the war were also significant. Governments took control of industry and resources to support the war effort, leading to rationing and changes in civilian life. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers to replace men who had gone to fight, marking a shift in social dynamics. Propaganda campaigns glorified national duty and demonized the enemy. While censorship restricted public knowledge of the true horrors at the front, despite these efforts, public morale was tested by news of heavy casualties and ongoing stalemates. Naval warfare was a critical element as well. The British Royal Navy implemented a blockade against Germany, aiming to cut off supplies and weaken the economy. In response, Germany used U-boats to attack Allied shipping, causing international tension, especially with neutral nations. The sinking of the RMS Lusitania in 1915, which killed many civilians, including Americans, intensified pressure on Germany and influenced future U.S. involvement. Meanwhile, battles in the air introduced reconnaissance and dogfights, creating a new dimension to warfare. Pilots became modern heroes, though survival rates were low. The global impact of the war became increasingly apparent. Colonies contributed troops, resources, and labor, demonstrating how the conflict extended far beyond Europe. At the same time, nationalist movements began to grow within empires, laying the groundwork for political change. By the end of 1915, the war had settled into a stalemate in Europe. With both sides struggling for incremental gains and seeking new strategies to break through entrenched defenses, World War I had become a prolonged, industrialized war that would leave a lasting legacy on nations and societies. By 1916, World War I had entered a critical phase, with both sides suffering enormous losses. The Western Front saw some of the most brutal battles in history. The Battle of Verdun, which began in February 1916, lasted 10 months and became a symbol of French determination. Both French and German forces endured horrific conditions, with hundreds of thousands killed or wounded. The philosophy of attrition warfare dominated strategy. Each side attempted to wear down the other through continuous attacks. Meanwhile, the Battle of the Somme, launched by the British in July 1916, aimed to relieve pressure on Verdun and break German lines. The first day of the Somme alone resulted in nearly 60,000 British casualties. Demonstrating the deadly effectiveness of modern weaponry, trench warfare remained the defining feature of the conflict. Soldiers contended with mud, disease, shell shock, and the constant threat of sniper fire. Life in the trenches was monotonous, yet terrifying, with rare periods of rest interrupted by sudden assaults. Innovations in military technology, including tanks and improved artillery, began to slowly change battlefield dynamics. Poison gas attacks caused panic and long-term injuries, prompting the development of protective masks. Despite these advancements, breakthroughs were limited, and progress on the front lines was painfully slow. The Eastern Front continued to see large-scale engagements, though logistical challenges and the vastness of the territory often hampered operations. Russia struggled with equipment shortages and poor transportation networks, while Germany and Austria-Hungary leveraged railways and industrial production to maintain their forces. The global nature of the war was further emphasized. As colonies contributed manpower, resources, and economic support, troops from Africa, India, and Australia fought alongside European armies. Highlighting the worldwide reach of the conflict, the war's social and political impact grew more pronounced. Governments tightened control over economies and information, introducing rationing, conscription, and censorship. Women continued to enter industries and offices to replace men at the front, accelerating social changes that would influence post-war society. Propaganda remained crucial, reinforcing patriotic duty while obscuring the true horrors of the trenches. Public morale was fragile. Families learned of staggering casualties and witnessed economic hardships. Naval warfare also influenced the war's course. Germany's unrestricted submarine campaigns sought to undermine Allied supply lines, particularly targeting merchant ships. This aggressive strategy drew neutral nations into the conflict, most notably contributing to the eventual entry of the United States in 1917. Air warfare, still in its infancy, provided reconnaissance and enabled aerial combat, setting the stage for the future of military aviation. By mid-1916, the war had become a protracted global struggle of unprecedented scale, testing human endurance and reshaping international relations. In 1917, the course of World War I began to shift dramatically. The entry of the United States into the conflict on the side of the Allies provided fresh troops and significant economic resources. American involvement followed Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, which had targeted neutral shipping, and the revelation of the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany encouraged Mexico to attack the U.S. This development boosted Allied morale and strengthened their position on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Russia was in turmoil. The February Revolution led to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, and the October Revolution brought the Bolsheviks to power. Russia's withdrawal from the war freed German forces to concentrate on the Western Front, but internal instability had permanently altered Eastern Europe's political landscape. On the Western Front, the war continued to be defined by grueling trench battles. The Allies launched offensives at Ypres, Passchendaele, and other strategic locations, seeking to gain ground despite the heavy toll. Soldiers endured artillery barrages, machine gun fire, and gas attacks. New tactics, such as coordinated artillery, barrages, and creeping barrages were developed to improve chances of success. Tanks and aircraft became more common, gradually changing battlefield dynamics. Though breakthroughs remained difficult to achieve, the sheer scale of destruction reinforced the notion that this war was fundamentally different from any conflict. Before it, World War I's impact extended beyond military engagements. Civilian populations suffered from food shortages, economic disruptions, and displacement. Governments intensified propaganda campaigns to maintain support for the war, often glorifying heroism and suppressing dissent. Women's contributions continued to expand as they worked in factories, offices, and medical services, laying the foundation for post-war social reforms. Meanwhile, colonial subjects remained heavily involved, serving in armies or providing critical resources. The global reach of the war highlighted the interconnected nature of empires and the broad consequences of European conflict. Naval engagements remained crucial, particularly in the Atlantic, where German U-boats targeted merchant vessels supplying Allied forces. Britain's naval blockade limited resources to the Central Powers, contributing to widespread shortages and economic strain. Technological advances in naval warfare, including convoy systems and anti-submarine tactics, began to mitigate some threats, but did not eliminate the danger. Airplanes increasingly conducted reconnaissance missions, providing critical intelligence. While dogfights and bombing raids added a new dimension to warfare, by late 1917, the war had created deep political, social, and economic strains. United States entry marked a turning point in terms of resources and morale. While Russia's exit underscored the instability affecting European powers, military strategies evolved and technology increasingly influenced outcomes. Yet human suffering continued at an unprecedented scale. World War I remained a conflict that reshaped nations, altered borders, and left a profound legacy for the 20th century. The final year of World War I, 1918, witnessed dramatic shifts on the battlefield. Germany launched the Spring Offensive in March, seeking a decisive victory before American forces could fully deploy. Initially, the Germans made significant advances, using stormtrooper tactics and concentrated artillery. However, the Allies held critical positions, and reinforcements, including fresh American troops, stabilized the front. The Allies then counterattacked in what became known as the 100 Days Offensive, gradually pushing German forces back and breaking the stalemate. The combination of manpower, resources, and strategic innovation eventually led to the collapse of Germany's military position. Trench warfare remained brutal throughout 1918, but mobility gradually increased with new tactics. Tanks, artillery, coordination, and aircraft enabled combined operations, giving the Allies a strategic edge. Soldiers continued to endure hardships, including disease, exhaustion, and psychological trauma. The use of poison gas, artillery, and machine guns left lasting scars on combatants and civilians alike. In addition, Food shortages, economic strain, and disrupted supply lines affected both soldiers and populations on the home front. Political developments were equally significant. Germany faced internal unrest, with strikes and protests weakening morale and authority. Austria-Hungary disintegrated as nationalist movements in its diverse territories sought independence. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, and new nations emerged in the Middle East and Europe. These political upheavals transformed borders and created long-term challenges for peace and stability. The abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, November 1918, marked the end of Imperial Germany and paved the way for the Weimar Republic. World War I's global impact was evident. Colonial troops had played a significant role throughout the conflict, and the war's economic demands had strained empires worldwide. Women's expanded participation in labor and public life influenced post-war social reforms. Civilians suffered immensely from shortages, displacement, and bombing raids. Propaganda shaped public perception. But many societies faced the harsh reality of loss and devastation. The Armistice of November 11, 1918, officially ended fighting on the Western Front. Celebrations erupted across Europe, but the relief was tempered by the enormous human cost. Approximately 10 million soldiers and 7 million civilians had died, with millions more wounded or traumatized. The physical and psychological scars of the war would persist for decades. Influencing literature, art, and political thought, the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, formally concluded the war, but imposed severe penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, reparations, and military restrictions. While the treaty aimed to prevent future conflict, it sowed resentment and instability that contributed to World War II. The League of Nations was established to promote peace, but its effectiveness was limited. World War I reshaped the world, politically, socially, and technologically, leaving a profound and lasting legacy. World War II began in 1939. 2 decades after the end of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles and economic instability had left Germany humiliated and desperate. Adolf Hitler rose to power with promises to restore German pride, rebuild the military, and expand territory. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland using blitzkrieg tactics, a combination of rapid movement by tanks, infantry, and air support. Within weeks, Poland was defeated and Britain and France declared war on Germany, marking the start of a conflict that would engulf the world. The early phase of the war was marked by rapid German victories in Europe. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France fell quickly under German control. The fall of France in 1940 shocked the world, and the British stood alone against Hitler's expanding empire. The Battle of Britain became a turning point as the Royal Air Force defended the skies against relentless Luftwaffe attacks. Radar technology and determination allowed Britain to survive, preventing German invasion and maintaining a critical base for future Allied operations. Meanwhile, the war expanded globally. Italy, under Mussolini, allied with Germany, and sought its own territorial gains in North Africa. Japan, pursuing expansion in Asia and the Pacific, attacked China and later the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, bringing America into the conflict. The war now spanned Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific, creating a truly global struggle. The scale of destruction and the human costs continued to rise dramatically as nations mobilized entire populations for total war. World War II introduced unprecedented technological and military innovations. Tanks, aircraft, and naval vessels were improved and mass-produced. Submarines, strategic bombing campaigns, and advanced artillery reshaped combat. Civilians were targeted like never before, with bombings, occupation, and genocide. Hitler's policies led to the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, were systematically murdered. Propaganda, censorship, and mobilization efforts affected societies worldwide. Emphasizing the total nature of the conflict, economic and social impacts were immense. Countries devoted all resources to the war effort, with rationing, industrial production, and workforce. Mobilization affecting daily life. Women entered factories and offices in huge numbers. A continuation of trends from World War I colonies contributed troops, resources, and labor, demonstrating the global reach of European empires. The war's early years showed both the destructive power of modern warfare and the resilience of nations determined to survive and resist. By 1942, the tide of World War II began to shift. Germany had invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, initiating Operation Barbarossa, which resulted in enormous casualties and a brutal struggle on the Eastern Front. Harsh winters, logistical challenges, and fierce Soviet resistance slowed German advances. Key battles such as Stalingrad and Leningrad became symbols of endurance and sacrifice. Stalingrad, in particular, marked a decisive turning point. After months of fighting, the German army was encircled and forced to surrender in 1943. This victory boosted Allied morale and marked the beginning of the German retreat. In the Pacific, the United States fought to halt Japanese expansion. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a pivotal naval engagement, resulting in the destruction of much of Japan's carrier fleet. Island-hopping campaigns allowed Allied forces to reclaim territory gradually, while air and naval power became critical in determining outcomes. The war in the Pacific demonstrated the importance of technology, intelligence, and strategy. With aircraft carriers replacing battleships as the central naval force, the Holocaust intensified during these years. Nazi Germany implemented systematic genocide across occupied Europe, targeting Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. Concentration and extermination camps, including Auschwitz and Treblinka, became the sites of horrific atrocities. The scale of human suffering and cruelty shocked the world and highlighted the moral dimensions of the conflict. Documentation and survivor testimonies would later ensure that these crimes were remembered and condemned. Technological innovation continued to influence the war, proved tanks, aircraft, long-range artillery, and code-breaking efforts played decisive roles. Intelligence, including deciphering the German Enigma code, allowed the Allies to anticipate and counter Axis operations. Meanwhile, civilian populations continued to endure bombings, occupation, and shortages. Emphasizing the total nature of modern warfare, the United States' industrial capacity became a key advantage. Factories produced ships, tanks, aircraft, and weapons at unprecedented scales. Lend-Lease programs supplied Allied nations with vital materials, demonstrating how economic power could directly influence military outcomes. Social changes continued, with women and minority groups entering industries and military services, laying the groundwork for post-war social reforms. By late 1942, early 1943, momentum began to shift toward the Allies. Germany faced defeats. On multiple fronts, Japan's expansion slowed, and the global balance of power started to favor nations committed to defeating Axis aggression. World War II had become a conflict of endurance, strategy, and industrial might, shaping not only the battlefield, but the future of nations and societies worldwide. 1944 marked the final phase of World War II in Europe. The Allied invasion of Normandy, known as D-Day, on June 6, 1944, was one of the largest amphibious operations in history. Allied forces, including troops from the United States, Britain, and Canada, stormed the beaches of Normandy under intense German fire. The operation established a critical foothold in Western Europe, allowing the Allies to begin liberating France and moving toward Germany. The campaign involved meticulous planning, intelligence, and coordination, highlighting the complexity of modern warfare. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union pushed westward after victories at Stalingrad and Kursk. Red Army advances forced Germany to fight on multiple fronts, weakening their military and creating logistical challenges. Cities were devastated, and civilian populations suffered immensely under bombardments, forced labor, and occupation. The Eastern Front became a massive arena of destruction, with millions of casualties among both soldiers and civilians. In the Pacific, Allied forces continued island-hopping campaigns to reclaim territory from Japan. Strategic battles, including the Mariana Islands and Leyte Gulf, weakened Japanese naval and air power. The United States' industrial and technological advantages, combined with effective strategy, gradually shifted the balance of power. The use of aircraft carriers, and submarines proved decisive in controlling sea lanes and supporting ground operations. The Holocaust reached its tragic conclusion. In 1945, as Allied forces liberated concentration camps across Europe, the full scale of Nazi atrocities became clear, shocking the world and emphasizing the moral imperative of defeating tyranny. Documentation and survivor accounts ensured that these events would never be forgotten, shaping post-war human rights initiatives. By mid-1944, Germany faced imminent defeat. Allied bombing campaigns devastated cities and infrastructure, while continuous ground offensives pushed German forces back toward Berlin. Morale within the Axis powers declined as resources ran low, soldiers were exhausted, and civilian populations faced extreme hardship. The combination of military pressure, strategic coordination, and industrial capacity ensured that Allied victory was increasingly inevitable. The war's final year also highlighted social, economic, and technological transformations. Women and minorities continued to play critical roles in the workforce, while technological innovations such as radar, jet aircraft, and improved communications reshaped combat. Civilian resilience, propaganda, and total war strategies demonstrated how deeply World War II had affected societies worldwide. World War II officially ended in Europe on May 8, 1945, with Germany's unconditional surrender, and in the Pacific on September 2, 1945, following Japan's surrender after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war left a devastating human toll. Over 70 million people died, including civilians and military personnel. Cities lay in ruins, economies were shattered, and millions of refugees roamed Europe and Asia. The immediate challenge for the world was rebuilding nations, restoring order, and preventing another global conflict. The political landscape underwent dramatic changes. Germany was divided into occupation zones, controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Laying the foundation for the Cold War, Japan came under Allied occupation, leading to political and social reforms. The United Nations was established in 1945 to promote international cooperation and prevent future wars. The creation of the UN reflected lessons learned from the failures of the League of Nations. After World War I, the economic impact was profound. Countries relied heavily on international aid and reconstruction programs, such as the U.S. Marshall Plan in Europe. Industries, infrastructure, and agriculture required rebuilding. The war had accelerated technological development, including advances in aviation, computing, medicine, and nuclear energy. These innovations had both military and civilian applications. Influencing post-war society, socially, World War II transformed gender roles and labor patterns. Women's contributions in factories and offices led to lasting changes in workforce participation. Migration and population displacement reshaped demographics, while human rights movements emerged in response to the atrocities of the Holocaust and war crimes. Education and cultural initiatives sought to memorialize the conflict while promoting peace and understanding. Geopolitically, the world became divided into two major blocs: the Western democracies led by the United States and the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc. This division marked the beginning of the Cold War, influencing global politics, military strategy, and alliances for decades. Former colonies pushed for independence, fueled by both weakened European powers and new ideas of self-determination. The long-term legacy of World War II continues to influence international relations, law, and culture. Lessons learned about total war, genocide, and human rights shaped global institutions and conventions. Understanding this period is crucial for comprehending modern history, geopolitics, and society. The aftermath of World War II reshaped the 20th century. Europe and Asia faced immense reconstruction challenges, with cities, infrastructure, and industries needing rebuilding. Millions of displaced persons required shelter, food, and medical aid. The creation of the United Nations aimed to prevent future conflicts and provide a forum for international diplomacy. The war also prompted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, reflecting lessons from the Holocaust and emphasizing global commitments to justice and equality. Germany and Japan underwent political transformations. Germany was divided into East and West, with differing economic and political systems under Soviet and Western control. Japan adopted a democratic constitution under Allied supervision, renouncing war and focusing on economic recovery. These post-war transformations aimed to prevent future aggression and foster long-term stability. The Cold War emerged as a defining feature of global politics. Ideological competition between the United States and the Soviet Union influenced international relations, leading to arms races, proxy wars, and political tensions worldwide. Nations aligned with either bloc, shaping economic, military, and cultural policies for decades. Meanwhile, decolonization accelerated as former colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East sought independence, reshaping global power structures. Technological and economic consequences were profound. Wartime innovations in aviation, nuclear, energy, medicine, and communication revolutionized civilian life. Industrial capacity, initially mobilized for war, fueled post-war economic growth. Education, science, and cultural institutions expanded, reflecting the social transformation brought by total war and mass mobilization. Socially, women's expanded roles in the workforce and public life during the war persisted, leading to gradual changes in gender equality. Human rights awareness grew, influenced by the atrocities of the Holocaust and other wartime crimes. Memorials, literature, and films commemorated the war, ensuring that its lessons were passed to future generations. World War II permanently altered global politics, economics, and society. It demonstrated the destructive potential of modern warfare, the resilience of societies under strain, and the necessity of international cooperation. Understanding this period is essential to appreciate contemporary geopolitics, technological progress, and human rights developments. The war's legacy continues to shape the world in profound ways, highlighting both the cost of conflict and the importance of peace.